Hey you guys, Peter here. I thought I'd do something a little different today. A lot of people ask me what were my first ships. So I'm going to explain how I first got started visiting cruise ships in Los Angeles Harbor. It was December of 1973, and I had been a big fan of ocean liners at that time for about a year after having a paper assigned to me in American history class about the Lusitania. Anyway, we had the Queen Mary in Long Beach, which I had actually visited even before I became an ocean liner fanatic. But in December of 73, it would have been right after Christmas, and I had my mom drive me down to the Queen Mary. It was probably part of my Christmas present, and if she were at the time able to give me any money, I would have been spending it on the Queen Mary in the toy and hobby shop to buy the Revel and Airfix 600 model kits of ships like the France and Mauritania and even the United States. That's the Revel model of her behind me. So on the way home, because I loved bridges, that was a passion of mine even before ships, I asked Mom if she would take me the longer way over the Desmond Bridge in Long Beach, which has since been torn down, a steel arch bridge, and the Vincent Thomas Bridge, this beautiful green suspension bridge. And as we were going over the Vincent Thomas Bridge, I saw a small cruise ship at the terminal, the cruise terminal, which was right on the port side of the bridge if you were heading west, okay? So that ship was the Spirit of London. So I said, Mom, please, can we go down there and get a close-up look at that ship? And she, of course, lovingly took me down there. And when we got to the terminal, they were raising the gangway, and the security guard said, sorry, kid, but it's too late. You can't visit the ship. And I was like, what do you mean I can't visit the ship? I said, it's possible to visit ships? And she said, yeah, but you got to get a visitor's pass. So she handed me a schedule. It was the P&O Cruises schedule at the time. And the next ship on the schedule was the Arcadia, which was even better, way better, built in 1954, 30,000 ton ocean liner, with classic woodwork and all of that. So I begged my mom, did the laundry, did the dishes, mowed the lawn, did everything I could, my household chores, kept my grades up in school. And on January 20th, 1974, my mom whisked me back down to LA Harbor, where I visited my first ship other than the Queen Mary, the SS Arcadia. And that ship to this day haunts me. The beautiful woodwork, the linoleum on her interiors, the etched glass, the brass, the nickel. She had that British post-war style, the Odeon style, which is sort of like Art Deco, but a little toned down. And she was just so beautiful. A little faded at that point in time. P&O was going through a very rough time, and they weren't maintaining the ships well. But Arcadia was the ship that we had here in LA, and she was the longest lived of all the post-war P&O ships. They were magnificent ships, a whole fleet of them, and they were all being scrapped at that time in Taiwan because of the fuel crisis. So we spent the day on the Arcadia, and that was lovely. And then the next ship that was scheduled was the Orsova. But unfortunately, that was the old schedule, and I found out later that Orsova had already been scrapped. She was in Taiwan being cut up, and they replaced her 1974 World Cruise with the Canberra, which almost got scrapped the year before after a very unsuccessful cruise program out of the US. Anyway, she was too big and too deep of a draft and too expensive to operate on cruises out of US. But they did take her back to the UK, and she ultimately became hugely successful over the next couple of decades. So Canberra, my mom couldn't take me, so I had my dad take me down to Canberra. And at the time, she was one of the biggest ships in the world. It was the France, the QE2, Michelangelo, Raffaello, and then Canberra. And Michelangelo Raffaello in France would soon be gone, and Canberra would soon be the second biggest cruise ship in the world. But at that time, she was still very modern to me. And it was an interesting experience for me because I wasn't too fond of my dad, but he did love ships. And because of ships and because of his old Hollywood connections, I ended up becoming friends with my dad. So we would have these long conversations on the hour drive down to the ship and hour drive back up from the ship. And I would go on board with my horrible pocket Instamatic camera and wander. And my dad would go straight to the bar and get what he called off and off, which I think was beer and ale. And he would sit and regale the passengers with his stories of old Hollywood, which were pretty cool stories, actually. So anyway, I wandered Canberra and just remember thinking she was so huge, and she had these different promenades. There was this one area that was outside of a glass wall that you could walk along her upper decks, and then inside of the glass wall were all the shuffleboard courts and the main swimming pool area and those gorgeous sleek funnels and that beautiful superstructure that was built up with all those gorgeous curves. And she had the aft decks that terraced down and this lovely fully encircling promenade on her lower decks that had so much sheer that you could barely see all the way across through that dip from stem to stern. What a special ship she was. And Canberra stuck around for quite a while. I would get to visit her dozens more times and actually finally sail in her final year in 1997. So that was Canberra. And then the next ship in port was the Himalaya. And I knew the Himalaya was on her final, it would be her final visit to Los Angeles. They had already said she was going to be withdrawn from service that October. So I chose Himalaya over Elenice, which was coming to LA, the former Lurleen. She was there. I remember these dates because they were grained in my psyche. Elenice was here February 26th through 27th, and then Himalaya came on February 28th. And because of the fuel crisis, my dad couldn't get to drive me down for both of the ships, so I had to choose. So I chose Himalaya, knowing I would never see her again. And that was an interesting day too. It was very cloudy and it was gloomy. The Himalaya was really long in the teeth. She was very rusty and seemed forlorn. And I guess knowing that she was going to be scrapped, it was a sad visit, but I'm so glad I saw her. But we could have spent a lot more time on board, and both my dad and I just kind of went, yeah, you know, it was not a happy visit, but I wish I stayed longer and took more photographs, even though they're terrible photographs, because Himalaya was a beautiful old lady, and she would soon be gone. So those are my first 3 ships, and 4 if you include the Spirit of London. I would eventually visit her, and then again many more times as Sun Princess. But I'm going to save that for another video. If you like this one, I'll do more about my early ship visits and include some of those very, very poorly rendered photographs that I took at the time as a kid in wonder of these great ships, which are now just memories. Also, please do that like and subscribe thing. I'm trying not to be like the typical influencer who does all of the jumping through various hoops to get the algorithms. I just want to give you guys real content. So if you like the channel, I appreciate your support in any way you can give it, and tell your friends about it too. I've been around, I've seen a lot of ships, 300 or so cruises under my belt, and I know and love my stuff when it comes to cruise ships and ocean liners. Thank you.